You know all those heated debates we have today about sex ed? Well, what if I told you they were having the exact same arguments over 100 years ago? Today, we're cracking open a guide from 1916, and this thing, it declared an all-out war on ignorance, and you won't believe how modern it sounds. Hey, welcome to Text 2. If you're the kind of person who loves digging into the old books that secretly shaped our modern world, you're in the right place. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we unpack wild stuff like this every single week. All right, so let's jump right in. I want you to do something for me. Picture the early 1900s, like 1916. How do you think people talked about sex back then? Seriously, what's the first image that pops into your head? I'm willing to bet you imagined, well, pretty much complete and total silence, right? A society where you just didn't talk about it. And you know what? For the most part, you'd be right. But, and this is a big but, right in the middle of all that quiet, one person stood up and said, hey, this silence, it's not just quaint or old-fashioned, it's literally killing people. Okay, so before we get to the book itself, we gotta set the scene. To really get just how explosive this book was, you have to understand the world it landed in. And this was a world defined by what the author himself called a policy of mystery. And that's key. It wasn't just that people were quiet, it was an intentional, enforced silence. So this author we're talking about, Maurice Bigelow, he just nails the description of his time. He says the standard thinking, the time-honored policy, was that anything to do with sex was, well, impure, degraded, something you had to hide. The whole goal wasn't to actually prepare kids for life. It was to keep them innocent by keeping them completely in the dark. But here's the thing about silence, right? Just because things are quiet on the surface doesn't mean people aren't thinking. And smack in the middle of this era, a totally revolutionary argument started to bubble up. And this is where our guy, Maurice A. Bigelow, a professor at Columbia University, enters the picture. In 1916, he drops this book, Sex Education, and I can't stress this enough, this was a bombshell. He basically argued that the way to deal with all this impure stuff wasn't to hide it. It was to do the complete opposite, to drag it into the light with clear scientific and ethical teaching. And the dedication of his book, man, it says it all. His entire philosophy is right there. He believed that the problems of sex didn't come from sex itself. No, they came from ignorance. And what's the only cure for ignorance? That's right, education. So why was Bigelow so fired up about this? Why was he so sure that this policy of silence, which had been around for ages, had to go? Well, it was pretty simple, actually. He just opened his eyes. He looked around and saw the absolute train wreck it was causing in real time. So let's break it down. What was the real problem with just keeping silent? What's the fundamental flaw in trying to protect kids by just not telling them anything about a huge part of life? Well, Bigelow put it bluntly. He called the policy of silence a gigantic failure. Why? For one super simple, totally inescapable reason. Kids are going to find out anyway. That's not up for debate. It's a guarantee. The only real choice society has is this. Who's going to teach them? Is it going to be a parent or a teacher, or is it going to be someone else? And he lays out the two options so clearly here. On the one hand, you've got the policy of silence. And where does that lead? To kids learning from, and these are his words, vulgar playmates and depraved servants. It just wraps the whole thing in this dangerous secrecy. But the other path, the policy of enlightenment, that brings in parents, teachers, reliable sources, and it swaps out that dangerous mystery for actual scientific understanding. This all feeds into his big idea, what he called intelligent control. See, he said that animals, they run on instinct. But humans, we're different. We have reason, we have choice. So to manage these incredibly powerful parts of ourselves, we don't need shame, and we definitely don't need secrecy. We need knowledge, so we can make good, informed choices for ourselves. And listen, for Bigelow, this was not some abstract academic debate. This wasn't just about the best way to raise kids. He was screaming from the rooftops that this policy of ignorance was directly causing a massive, devastating public health crisis that was wrecking lives coast to coast. He saw it as a clear domino effect. It starts with poor personal hygiene. Young people totally in the dark about their own bodies. Topics like masturbation or menstruation end up hurting themselves physically and mentally. Then, that same ignorance acts like gasoline on a fire for what they called social diseases. And all of that, together, creates the perfect breeding ground for prostitution.
what he terms the social evil, to just flourish in that darkness.
And he wasn't afraid to call out the specific, dangerous myths that were holding this whole broken system together. He goes right after this widespread belief. He calls it a monstrous lie, that men needed to be sexually active to be healthy. I mean, it was a complete fabrication used to prop up the entire prostitution industry. And the price people paid for these lies? It was just unbelievable. Get this. The book gives a conservative estimate that more than 50%, that's more than 1 in 2 men in 1916, were infected with something like syphilis or gonorrhea. This wasn't some minor issue on the fringes of society. It was a full-blown epidemic, hiding right out in the open. And just look at what was at stake. These were not colds. We're talking about things that caused sterility in men and women, blindness in babies, heart disease, even certain kinds of insanity and paralysis. The damage was literally being passed on to the next generation. So, for Bigelow, this wasn't about being progressive. This was a matter of life and death. You know, it's so easy to look at a book from 1916 and think of it as just a historical curiosity, right? A little relic from a totally different time. But what's so wild is that the questions Bigelow was wrestling with back then, they are almost word for word the exact same questions we're still arguing about today. And this one quote from him just sums it all up, doesn't it? The only safe and sure road is to be found in knowledge. For him, the answer to dealing with this huge, powerful, natural part of being human wasn't shame. It wasn't silence. It was and always would be knowledge. In 1916, that was a truly radical idea. But here's the part that really gets me. Just think for a second about the debates we're having right now, today. Who should teach this stuff? What exactly should they teach? When should they start? It's the same conversation, 100 years later, and we're still in it. So if this little trip back in time gave you some food for thought about today, then do us a favor and subscribe to TextQ. We really believe that the best way to figure out where we're going is to understand where we've been. So Maurice Bigelow thought education was the key to unlocking a healthier, more honest world. Well, over a century has gone by, which leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? Is that door he was trying to open fully unlocked yet?